to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker. I met Dr. Gleb Tsipursky about a year ago. He came to Catholic University where I worked and met with me. He actually met with our previous president, and we talked about actually getting him to host one of our sessions. Dr. Gleb is an international renowned thought leader known as the disaster avoidance expert. He's on a mission to protect leaders from dangerous judgment errors known as cognitive biases by developing the most effective risk management and decision-making strategies. A best-selling author of several traditional published books, Dr. Gleb is most well known for Never Go With Your Gut: How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters, published by Careers Press. His newest book, published by Changemaker Books, is Resilience, Adapt, and Plan for the New Abnormal of COVID-19, Coronavirus Pandemic. His groundbreaking thought leadership has been featured in over 550 articles and 450 interviews in prominent venues. Those include USA Today, Time, Fast Company, CBS News, Fortune, CNBC Magazine, and many, many more. Dr. Gleb's expertise comes from over 20 years of consulting, coaching, speaking, and training on decision-making and risk management strategy as CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts. His clients include innovative startups such as Outreach Corporation, large nonprofits such as World Wildlife Fund, and Fortune 500 companies ranging from Aflac to Xerox. His expertise also comes from his research background as a behavioral scientist with 15 years in academia, including 7 years as a professor at Ohio State University. He published dozens of peer-reviewed articles in academic journals. And in his free time, he makes sure to spend abundant quality time with his wife to avoid disasters in his personal life. To help you take advantage of his groundbreaking expertise, I've asked him to share with us about overcoming resistance to change via emotional and social intelligence in higher education. Please give a virtual warm welcome to Dr. Gleb Tsipursky.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I really appreciate you inviting me. All right, everyone. So let's talk about how do you as higher education professionals overcome resistance to change, specifically using emotional and social intelligence. So I'll be talking about that, and I'll be talking about what emotional and social intelligence is, all of these topics. And right now, of course, there's a lot of resistance to change. With COVID-19, folks are scared, folks are anxious, they don't want to change, but there's a lot of change that needs to happen for higher education to survive and thrive in this very difficult environment. So this is an especially important time and an especially good topic to focus this year for DC CUPA HR on overcoming resistance to change. How do you do that effectively in such a way as to be empathetic and considerate to people while also making sure to accomplish your institutional goals, the goals of your higher education institution? So let's talk about that. Let's dive right in. First thing I want to talk about is something that many people like to ask me once they hear my accent, not when they see me, not when it's just my physical appearance is normal, but clearly my accent indicates I'm not from around here, right? Well, I'll be happy to share that with you so that you know where I'm from. I'm from a small country called Moldova. It's in Eastern Europe, and you can see that it's so small right there on the map that you need an arrow to point to it. It's a tiny country. My parents left in 1991 when I was 10 years old, when fortunately Moldova was liberated from Soviet domination. And we came to the United States, and I settled down there in New York City with my parents, naturally. And I was really glad when we left. Growing up in New York City, this cultural hodgepodge, I was especially glad in 1996 when there was a World Values Survey done. And it was found that Moldova was the least happy country in the world, least happy country in the world. I don't know why, I have no idea. I was a kid when I left, but that made me especially glad that my parents left. But growing up in New York City, which was a multicultural metropolis, just like DC is a multicultural metropolis. I know not everyone here is from DC. We have a number of guests from elsewhere as well. But New York, DC, those areas are very multicultural places. And it's fine to have an accent, to be an immigrant. It's not perceived as something strange and weird. And so while many immigrants choose to give up their accents, especially when they come when they're young, I didn't choose to do that. I chose to retain my accent. I was proud. My parents taught me to be proud of my cultural heritage. Well, later, unfortunately, as I left New York City and I started looking at the behavioral science of decision-making, risk management research, I discovered that that was kind of a dumb idea, dumb decision on my part, unfortunately, because of something called accent discrimination. So accent discrimination has to do with the perception of people with a foreign accent, those with a foreign accent. That's extensively researched and shown in the United States that in the United States, those with a foreign accent are perceived as less trustworthy than those who don't have a foreign accent. So there's a perception of folks like me and many of you perhaps who have foreign accents as being less trustworthy. There's only one accent to which this doesn't apply, and that's the British accent. They still have that cultural imperialism going for them. But it applies to all other accents. I wish I knew this when I was young enough to drop the accent, but I didn't. Now, how's that relevant to change and resistance to change? Well, it has to do with two dangerous judgment errors, those cognitive biases that Andrea mentioned I study and research and help folks like you address in your work. Two cognitive biases called the halo effect and the horns effect. The halo effect and the horns effect. Now, before going on, you should be able to see a link to Vivox, which is an app that we'll be using to do surveys. So you'll be able to see that link, and I'll also type it into the chat. So make sure to either go to the chat and click on the link, or take it from the screen and put it into, you can put it into your smartphone, you can put it in an additional window in your browser, whatever makes most sense to you. But please go ahead and go there right now, because we'll be using surveys to test and evaluate how everyone's doing and their perceptions of what's going on in their institutions, and of course, how the presentation is going. So make sure to do that. I'll give you 10 seconds to go there, either type it out or click on the link before I go on. All right. So if you haven't gone there yet, make sure to go there while I'm talking. But what I was talking about there was the accent discrimination. There are two cognitive biases that are especially relevant, and they tie into resistance to change, which is called the halo effect and the horns effect. The halo effect and the horns effect. So the horns effect has to do that somebody who has little horns, if you dislike one characteristic of someone, you'll tend to dislike all of their other characteristics. So if you dislike somebody's accent, or their appearance, or their religious background, or what they're trying to get you to do continually and repeatedly, you will, if you feel like they're not part of your group, this is the critical thing. If they're not part of your group, you'll tend to dislike all of their other characteristics. And the halo effect, it's kind of like having a little halo, so it's the opposite. If you like one characteristic of someone, you'll tend to have too positive a view of their other characteristics. This is especially bad for business relationships. So for example, within university settings, I talk to CUPA HR members all the time during my consulting engagements. And what they tell me is classic cases of horns effect between them and faculty. So for example, when they're trying to get faculty on a committee on a search committee to take into account diversity requirements, the faculty are perceiving that as very often as being an imposition from without by external policy standards. And they don't like that, and they don't like HR people who try to encourage them to do that. And that's a horns effect development. That's kind of a clear example of where there's a horns effect going on. And there are a number of things you can do to address that. But that is something that they're resisting change, of course. That's an example. Another example with the horns effect is when you're trying to get faculty to accept a new retirement plan. I mean, I remember when when I was helping a CUPA HR group do that, and the faculty were really resistant to this because they saw it as being an imposition on their current accepted way of doing things by a group that they did not perceive as being on their side. And so we had to do a number of things first to address this perception of group dynamics, of this horns effect, to make sure that the faculty indeed perceived the HR group committee that was trying to encourage them to accept the retirement plan as being on their side before then going on to the specific dynamics of the retirement plan. So those are some examples of where the horns effect plays out. And of course, the halo effect plays out as well in resistance to change. So these are two cognitive biases. And this is something that we need to understand is a bigger part of how we think and how we feel. Now, the way to deal with cognitive biases is to use two dynamics, two skills. I'll specifically talk about the social intelligence part of it, but it's emotional intelligence and social intelligence. You have to be aware of both and focus specifically on social intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence is as skill areas, and encompasses two broad skill areas. So it's a dynamic, it's an area, it's a very broad area that has to do with your ability to be aware and be able to manage your own emotions. So awareness of your emotions, that's one broad skill area. And management of your emotions, that's another broad skill area. That's quite important for managing resistance to change, but even more important is social intelligence. Social intelligence is being aware of and managing other people's emotions and their relationships to each other. Now, our emotions drive our decision-making fundamentally. About 80 to 90% of our decisions comes from emotions. You know, horns effect wouldn't be an issue if that wasn't the case, or halo effect wouldn't be an issue. People aren't rational, no matter how often they might think they are, especially faculty tend to think that they're rational. And I know this, having spent 7 years as a professor at Ohio State and 7 years before that as a lecturer and fellow and graduate student at UNC Chapel Hill. And I know that very intimately from interacting with faculty. So they think and feel more than most folks out there that they are cold and rational and they just are very strategic, and they're not. We all are primarily driven by our emotions, and you need to be able to influence other people's emotions, the emotions of faculty, the emotions of administrators, the emotions of students, in order to accomplish institutional organizational goals, and of course the relationships with each other to do that as well and overcome resistance to change from all parties. So that is the broad framework from which we're proceeding. Now, the danger here comes to resistance to change is with people going with their gut, following their intuitions, what feels comfortable. Gurus often tell us, go with your gut, trust your intuition, follow your heart. And that's why people resist change. They feel uncomfortable with change and they feel, well, if my gut is telling me that I shouldn't change and gurus tell me to trust my gut and follow my heart, that means that change is bad. Change is bad. No, I don't feel in my gut that this change is good. Therefore, I will not do it. So that's how people feel about change. And of course, this is a big problem for us because trusting your gut feels very comfortable, but it leads to disasters. Because our gut is evolved for the ancient savannah, not the modern world. You know, the current institution of higher education is very different from the ancient savannah for which our gut evolved. Our gut evolved for living in that savannah environment where we lived in small tribes of 15 people to 150 people. We were hunters, gatherers, and foragers. You know, the modern world, the modern higher educational institutions have really been around since World War II. We have not had nearly enough time to evolve and adapt for that. And even more recently, the huge evolutions in the last 6 months with COVID and so on, we're not evolved for that. We can't evolve for these things. We can't trust our gut in the modern environment. But people tend to do so because gurus advise them to do so. And this is a very bad idea. This is a very bad problem. So such bad advice is common because of these dangerous judgment errors called cognitive biases. And these are the specific failure modes, the specific way that our mind leads us astray because of how our mind is wired, because of our evolutionary background and the structure of our mind that is a result of our evolutionary background, as well as just generally how it functions. So not going to go in depth into that unless you want me to in the Q&A, and I'll be happy then to go in depth into the prefrontal cortex and all that other fun stuff. But the crucial thing to remember is that halo effect, horns effect, and other dangerous judgment errors, other cognitive biases result from a combination of our evolutionary background and the structure of our brain. And that is when people go with their gut, that's why they make bad decisions. That they make people, we all tend to, when we go with our gut, make bad reactions in response to threats. Our primary response to threats is the fight or flight response. And that was great for our ancestor hunter-gatherers because the risks they faced were intense, immediate, in the moment. Saber-toothed tigers, you might have heard of this as the saber-toothed tiger response, where it's something that was in the modern world, it's pretty dangerous to use that response, but in the savanna environment, that was great. That was the right response to use. So that was great in that world, but it's pretty dangerous in today's world. So that is something that you have to realize is not a good response, but people tend to use it. Of course, they feel that that's the right response to use, and they use that response because it feels right. And though in the modern world, the risks are much more long-term, much more uncertain. They might come from a notification on your smartphone about a disease that's springing up in the middle of nowhere, China, right? That's something that might come up, or an email about announcing a shift to the retirement plan, where a lot of faculty, when that was first, one of the reasons they brought me in was because the first effort to communicate the retirement plan was a mass email that was not met with good response about changes to the retirement plan. So that's not a good idea. All right, everyone. So at this stage, I want you to go to the link. Again, you should be at the link, the Vivox app link. It's in your chat, and we will be doing 2 polls right now. So please look at the first poll. I see that there are 32 people there, and I want you to respond to the first poll. And the first poll, as you'll see on the screen, is, was there a time when you were very confident about something? You were very confident that you were right about something, and you turned out to be badly wrong, leading you to doubt other areas where you might be wrong. So it's about going with your gut, going with how you feel. Was there ever a time when that happened for you? So again, look in the chat. If you're not there yet, I see we have 44 participants, but only 35 people are on the website. So please make sure to go to the website and vote. I'll give you 10 more seconds to go to the website and vote. Again, I chatted the link just again into the chat box. So please make sure to go there. Okay, 3 more seconds, and then I'll close it out. Great. So we see that for under 10%, they never had that experience where they thought that they were right about something and they turned out to be badly wrong, leading them to doubt other areas where they might be wrong. But the large majority of you had that experience. And I've definitely had that experience myself, whether about dropping the accent or many, many other areas of my life. So this is something that you have to realize is coming from your gut, where you feel confident and you're wrong, and then that leads you to doubt other areas where you're wrong, and then you kind of want to get away from that feeling, which is really uncomfortable. So that's the first survey. Then the second survey, I want to go back to the halo and horns effect. So if you remember the halo and horns effect, where we talked about the halo effect, where that's about how when you like one aspect of someone, you'll tend to have too positive a view of their other characteristics. And when you dislike one aspect of someone, you'll have too negative view of their other characteristics. There's actually a really great example of where I was giving a presentation, much like this one, to a regional conference of HR professionals, not simply higher education, but all HR professionals, to it in Columbus, Ohio. And if you know something about Columbus, Ohio, you know that it's the home of the Ohio State Buckeyes. So the Ohio State Buckeyes, football is the big thing here. And of course, people are widely fans, including HR professionals. And our big competitors are the University of Michigan Wolverines. So there's little love lost between the Ohio State Buckeyes and the University of Michigan Wolverines. So this was a regional conference 2018. And I was doing the closing keynote, and I asked over 100 HR leaders at this diversity inclusion regional conference in the closing keynote, how many of them would hire a University of Michigan fan? And of the over 100 leaders of that diversity inclusion, only 3 people raised their hand. 3 people would hire University of Michigan fan. So this is something that's very, very common. We don't realize, even HR leaders, HR diversity inclusion leaders, how much they're influenced by the horns effect there. So in your workplace, I want to ask, how problematic is the halo effect and the horns effect? How problematic is it? It's not at all minor problem, it's the moderate problem, or it's the large problem. So please go ahead and vote. See, we have 2/3 of the people voting. Great. And I'll give you 10 more seconds to make your voice heard. So make sure that you make your voice heard. 10 more seconds. Okay, so Maria said that she's not able to access the poll. Here you go, Maria. Here's the link to the poll again. So hopefully that will help you access the poll. All right, so I'm going to close this out. And you should be able to see the results. So we see that just under 15% of you, it's not at all a minor problem. So it's great, so you don't need to worry about it. But for the large majority of you, over 85%, the halo effect and the horns effect is some sort of a problem, either a moderate problem or a large problem. It's a moderate problem for 2/3 of you, and that's really important for you to realize and think about what steps you can take to address the problem in your organization and to communicate this information. So I'd suggest, if it's a moderate problem, that you think about it for yourself, talk about it to a few people, and see, okay, what are the areas where it's a problem, analyze those areas, and think about what steps to take. For those of you where it's a large problem, that's definitely something to immediately bring to leaders in the HR department and think about, okay, this is something that we really need to address in the very immediate future if it's a large problem. All right, great. So Maria says that she's got access to it, which is good. Let's go on to talk about the next steps. So how do we address these dangerous judgment errors? How do we address these cognitive biases like halo effect, horns effect, and others? You need to go against your intuitions, and this is hard. You need to learn, and more importantly, from social intelligence perspective, teach others how to go against their intuitions, how to go against their intuitions of resisting change. That's a hard thing to do, because early our intuitions feel right, feel comfortable. They helped human beings survive in that ancient savannah. So our emotions, 80 to 90% of our decisions tell us to go with our intuitions. They push us to go with our intuitions. But our brains, our emotions, our gut reactions, they're not wired the right way to make decisions in the modern world when we just follow our intuitions. Now, you already know this from a number of life areas, and so do the faculty, the students, and the administrators, and other staff with whom you deal, and for whom you're trying to overcome resistance to change, whose resistance to change you're trying to overcome. So think about, let's say, diet, right? Imagine walking into a break room and seeing a box of a dozen donuts. it's very tempting to take that donut and maybe, you take half of that delicious chocolate glazed donut. Well, once you take a half, it's very tempting to take the other half of the donut. And then it's, once you take one donut, it's very tempting to take two donuts and then maybe a third one. And before you know it, half the box is gone. Not that it ever happened to me, right? So, or maybe you prefer ice cream. Did you know that a serving of ice cream is half a cup of ice cream? I can't take half a cup of ice cream. I don't know anyone who can take half a cup of ice cream. That's not a realistic serving size. So that is something that in the modern environment, the processed food is not great. In the savannah environment, it was very important for us to have as much sugar as possible. So when we came across a source of sugar, like honey, apples, bananas, were very strongly triggered to eat as much of it as possible. We're the descendants of those who had a very strong sugar response because they survived and thrived and passed on their genes. We're the descendants of those who have a very strong fight or flight response, resistance to change. Instead, of course, in the modern world, what you should do is figure out techniques to address this sugar response. For example, passing by those tempting donuts and going for the bowl of fruit. That is a much healthier snack and tasty, delicious dessert. And whatever, maybe that's the technique you use, or maybe you use other techniques to make sure that you have a healthy diet instead of just eating half a box of donuts, which is not really great in the modern environment, although many people still struggle with that, which is why we have the obesity epidemic in this country. So this is something that many of you have learned. Hopefully all of you on this call have learned how to manage your eating in a healthy way. So you've already overcome your gut reactions, your intuitions, and you can use the same model to communicate to other folks who are resistant to change, halo effect, Horn's effect, and all of these other issues, how they have already succeeded in overcoming the resistance to change in some areas. And then they need to overcome the resistance to change in these mental habits, not simply physical diet habits, but these decision-making processes in the workplace where their emotions are pushing them in the wrong direction. So to address these dangerous judgment errors, the first thing you need to do is be aware of them and teach others about them. So of course, awareness for yourself is critically important to understand what's going on, but then you need to get others informed about these. And the assessment on dangerous judgment errors in the workplace is a very effective way to do so. It evaluates their extent and impact in your workplace for when you take it yourself and when you help others take it. And it provides next steps for addressing them. It also helps get people invested, helps get them emotionally bought into the process. So right now, I want you to open up the chat. We'll be using the chat for this section of the presentation. So make sure to open up the chat. I'll give you 10 seconds to open up the chat. In the meantime, I will be sharing my screen and showing you the assessment. All right. So you should be able to see the assessment on my screen. Hopefully you've opened up the chat at this stage. If not yet, then you open it up while I'm talking. And you'll see that there are 30 questions on the assessment. Each question refers to a problem that might occur in everyday professional situations. It's not something that's going to be vague. It's not going to ask about the halo effect or the Horn's effect. It's going to ask about behaviors, clearly observable behaviors that you can see, that others can see, that have to do with challenges regarding resistance to change. And your goal, whoever is taking the assessment, you'll definitely want other people, not simply you take the assessment, but want other people on your team to take the assessment, especially those whom you want to inform about cognitive biases and whom you want to get others informed about cognitive biases and for whom you want to overcome resistance to change. So both people in the HR team who are helping you overcome resistance to change throughout your higher education institution, and faculty, staff, administrators who you're trying to encourage to change effectively. So this should be pretty quick. What you want to do for each question is indicate how often it occurred in the past year as a percentage of all the times when it might have occurred. Don't take too long with each question. It should take you maybe 10 to 15, 20 seconds for each one. So let's go to number 6 first. So number 6, when a potential or current employee was evaluated, in what percentage of the situations was the evaluation too positive due to factors not relevant to their job competency or organizational fit? When was it too positive? So number 6, please chat your answer into the chat in the form of a percentage. Out of all the evaluations, when was it, how much was it too positive? Okay, we see already a large range from 0 to 75%, 80%, 30% to 80%, 90, 60, 60, 80, 75%, 30%, 35%. Let's get a few more, 60%, 75%, 80%. So we see that this is for pretty serious issue. When it's in the 10% range, 5-10% range, it's not a big deal. When it's getting, and of course, you can keep chatting your answers into the surveys, into the chat so that folks know what's going on. But when it's getting into the 20s, that's becoming more of an issue. When it's over 20, into the 30s, that's becoming more of a serious issue. And definitely when it's in the 40s and above, this is something that you really, as a priority, need to address. And this, of course, refers to the halo effect, when you have too positive an evaluation of others due to factors not relevant to their job competency or organizational fit. All right. Another issue that's very relevant to change, resistance to change management, is number 2. So number 2, this will be question 2. Percentage of team conflicts that occurred because someone overestimated the effectiveness of their communication and persuasiveness. So again, what percentage of team conflicts? When team conflicts do occur, which they occur sometimes, what percentage occur because someone overestimated the effectiveness of their communication and persuasiveness? So we see 70, 25, 70, 80, 95, 15, 75, 60, 50%, 70%, 40%, 95%, 75%, 85%, 80%, 12%. Oh, 12, that's very specific. 20, 60, 50%. So again, a wide range. So again, you should know and see what's going on in your organization. And when it's getting into the 20s and above, you want to definitely start addressing it. 30s, that's definitely becoming a serious issue. You definitely want to address this with this issue. So this is a big one. The last one I'll do just so you get a sense of what's going on. This is going to be number 4. Of all situations, when someone had evidence that would contradict their beliefs or clear information that would disprove their interpretation of a situation, in what percentage of cases did they ignore the evidence or misinterpret the information? This is a huge one for resistance to change, one of the biggest ones. So let's talk about this. 90%, 70%, 65%, 60%. Let's get a few more. 90%, 50%, 50%. 80%, 95, 70%, so 40, 50%, with 75%. So again, a large range, and the same idea. If it's getting into the 20s, especially if it's getting to the 30s, this is definitely something you want to get information into the hands of all the leaders in your organization to make sure that it's addressed. So we talked about the halo effect. This is number 6. This one, number 2, this refers to the illusion of transparency. When we communicate, we feel with our gut, we're comfortable with the idea that other people are 100% getting our message because we feel we're effective communicators. That's just how it feels to us. That's our gut reaction. Well, unfortunately, other people take in information through their own filters, so they may misunderstand what we're saying. There may also be a technical communication issue. They may mishear what we're saying. And especially in this modern world of Zoom meetings, right? It's very easy to have a technical glitch, mishearing or something, freezing for a second. And so there are lots of, and there are so many other ways where, somebody, let's say if you're writing a message, you might not express tone that you think you're expressing. So they might misread your tone of the message. There's so many team conflicts that occur because of the cognitive bias called the illusion of transparency. Number 4. This is called the confirmation bias. This is what this refers to. So the confirmation bias has to do with the fact that when we look for information, we tend to look for information that supports our beliefs. And we tend to ignore, and the second part of the confirmation bias is ignoring information that doesn't confirm our beliefs. So this is a big one. You'll have a lot of faculty completely blinding their eyes. And I don't want to pick too much on faculty, but I know that this is a major component of resistance to change is faculty members, probably the biggest one that I'm seeing in universities when I consult in university settings and coach folks in university settings. So this is a big, big issue. Really trying to deny reality, very uncomfortable with new information, very resistant to change. And so falling into the confirmation bias a lot. All right, so you've gone into the chat. Let's go back to our poll. So make sure to go back to the poll. And I want to ask you, how much value do you see in your team taking this assessment? How much value do you see in your team taking the assessment on dangerous judgment errors in the workplace? So please go ahead and vote. And by the way, your team, I mean both your HR team to get other people involved and understanding what's going on, and more broadly, your team in your higher education institution, your administrators, your faculty members, to get them to take it and encourage them to take it. So again, go back to the poll, the VVox poll, and please vote. We see that we have 86% of the people voting, so it's pretty good. We'll give you 10 more seconds to vote. Please go ahead, 10 more seconds to vote. And I'll again put it into the chat for anyone who needs it, the VVox app. 3 more seconds, make your opinion heard if you haven't yet. All right. Great. So we see that everyone would find some value in it. That's great. So everyone would find some value in either moderate value or high value. Half of you would find moderate value in it. So if you're finding moderate value in it, and I'll send the assessment afterward to you, you'll get it. Take it yourself and then start sharing it with your HR team. So that's something for you to start doing. Think about doing that within the, certainly take it within, you definitely want to take it within the next couple of days after the presentation. Ideally, ideally by the end of day tomorrow. So by the end of day Friday, you'll want to take it. And then within the next couple of weeks, bring it to your team. Certainly by the end of the month, by the end of November. For those who see high value in it, I will definitely try to get it to you by the end of day, and you'll want to definitely take it by the end of day today. And then by next week, start bringing it to your HR team, try to get everyone to take it, and then try to get your administrators to take it as a next step, and encouraging then faculty members to take it as well. All right, let's go on to the next technique. So this is about awareness. Awareness is, of course, the first step to addressing dangerous judgment errors, but it's not enough. You want to be aware, but then what do you do with this awareness? Well, there are 2 techniques that I want to share to address dangerous judgment errors in the resistance to change. One quick technique for everyday decisions around change management and other decisions that you don't want to screw up. These are 5 questions that you use to avoid decision disasters. Just takes a couple of minutes to go through these 5 questions and will avoid so many screw-ups, whether writing important emails, preparing important documents, preparing for meetings where you're trying to communicate change, thinking about how to write up something about change issues. You want to ask these questions 2 to 5 times a day for any decision that you don't want to screw up. And again, there are lots of things where you don't want to screw up these decisions. It will take you 2 minutes to ask these questions. Once you learn about the questions and the technique to asking them, it will take you many, many hours to undo screw-ups, maybe hundreds of hours potentially, and potentially many thousands of dollars, whereas it'll take you only a couple of minutes to do these questions. First question. What information didn't I yet fully consider? So what information didn't you fully take into account about this question? The confirmation bias tends to cause us to ignore information that we don't like to hear. So that's a big, big challenge. So for example, if you're writing an important email where you want to encourage someone to engage in some change issue, an individual faculty member, let's say you're trying to persuade them to take diversity requirements more seriously on a search committee. Think about not simply, don't ignore all their reasoning. Think about why they might not take into account these diversity requirements. Maybe they're feeling pressured. Maybe they're feeling that they're uncomfortable. Maybe they're trying to prioritize the research accomplishments over diversity requirements. And you need to think about them. You need to think about their perspective. What does it mean to be in their shoes? How can you address the illusion of transparency to communicate effectively to this person and help clarify to them why it's such a high priority and why in the end it will be beneficial for them and the whole university to make sure that diversity requirements are treated just as importantly as high quality research. Then, what dangerous judgment errors didn't I yet address? So if you're writing this email, I mentioned two, confirmation bias, and then another one might be illusion of transparency. Maybe there is a horns effect going on. Maybe they're feeling negative towards you because you are an HR person and they're a faculty member and they're feeling like you're on different sides. So you want to make sure to convey that you're on their side and that you're helping them address problems that they would experience if they're not taking your advice into account. What would a trusted and objective advisor suggest I do? So think about that little angel on your shoulder. What would they suggest you do in the situation? Maybe someone who's a senior member of your HR team, maybe someone who's in DC CUPA HR, a member of the board, the president, somebody like that, somebody who is a senior and experienced HR person who can help advise you on this question. Maybe a dean who is an ally of yours on getting diversity and inclusion requirements pushed into the faculty search activities, but that you might not want to bug them immediately in each question. So you'll get a lot of the benefit just by asking what this person would tell you in this situation. For about 50% of the benefit of this question just comes from being outside of yourself and saying, hey, what would this person tell me in this situation? What would I tell a trusted and objective friend in this situation as a trusted and objective advisor? And of course, you can get the other 50% of the benefit if you feel it's necessary by calling this person, or if you're a millennial, texting this person, or Zooming this person. Next, how have I addressed all the ways this could fail? So think about all the ways that this email to this faculty member can fail, the chair of the search committee. Maybe there was right now, for example, there's definitely a third wave of COVID is increasing. There's more and more problems going on. Maybe their school has gone from an in-person setting to an all virtual setting because of this wave of COVID, because the state government has shut down schools. That certainly can happen. So right now, their kids are at home and they're overwhelmed with work and taking care of their kids. And so they're pretty stressed out and struggling and upset. So think about somebody who's distracted, stressed out, struggling and upset, and reread your email draft to make sure that they would pay attention to the important parts of the email, draw their attention to it, and prevent anything that's maybe perceived as guilting or blaming them that they might interpret in a hostile manner. Finally, what new information would cause me to revisit this decision? So what would cause you to change your mind about this email? So for example, if you're writing this email, you could set a specific revision date. You could say that, hey, if I don't hear back from the chair of the search committee in a week, then I will give this person a call. So that gives you a certain specific, clear revision point. That's new information. Okay, this timeline would cause me to change my decision of just sending the email. Now I'll give a call to this person. So that might be a specific, clear revision point. If you don't have that revision point, you'll be wondering every day, well, why is this person not responding to me? What's going on? Did I upset them? Did I frustrate them? Are they not taking me seriously? And you'll be growing more and more anxious. Whereas if you have that week-long revision point, you exactly know what you're going to do in a week. You're going to give them a call and you'll see what's up with them. So this is the way that you use this technique. All right. Now I want you to go back to the poll and please vote on how much value you see in your team using this technique for your decision-making. And there are everyday decisions. So please go ahead and vote. Again, that's going to be in the chat if you don't have the poll up yet. So please make sure to go ahead and vote. I see 50% of the people voted. Okay, we're at 70%. Let's get a few more. Give you 10 more seconds to vote. 3 more seconds to make your voice heard. All right. Great. So we see that everyone would find some value in, which is great. So, and this seems a little bit even more valuable than the assessment on dangerous judgment errors. So those who would find moderate value in it, what you would just over 40% of you, what you want to do is definitely start using it yourself. So, and I will send you a decision aid with these 5 questions, which you can start using, print it out, put it by your computer, start using it yourself. And then as you find value in it, to get it to your colleagues in the HR department. For those who would find high value in it, that means that you don't simply want to use it yourself. You want to, as you get it, you want to forward it to your colleagues. I'll send you an email with additional resources. You can forward it to anyone you want. And I recommend that you forward it to your colleagues and tell them that, hey, you found this useful. You'll have the recorded webinar, and send it with them and say, hey, this is, I think, is something that we should definitely start using in our decision making around resistance to change and other decision making. All right, let's go on to a more broad technique, one that is for more significant decisions. These 5 questions you should be using, like I said, 2 to 5 times a day. Any email, any meeting, any report, anything that you don't want to screw up as you're preparing it, writing it up, maybe an announcement of some sort. Maybe you're choosing something about changing something and it's kind of a minor thing and you want to make sure it's not screwed up. When you're doing something more major, when you're doing something more serious, you want to use a more thorough technique that takes about an hour or more for making the best decisions. Oh, something I want to mention, just I want to make sure that this is clear. This is not simply for you to use individually. This is great to use as a team. So if you're having a team meeting to make a decision, you can structure your agenda around these 5 questions, and you can have everyone answer these 5 questions for themselves before they come to the meeting. And then just the meeting involves people talking through each point of these 5 questions and making the decision. This is super helpful for making meetings structured and effective and clear and quick. You can take 15 minutes to make a decision for something, not a major thing, but it's something that's kind of, you want to make sure to have a team decision on something that previously used to take an hour, and you can be much more confident about the quality of your decisions. Now, this is a technique that when you're doing it yourself might take as long as an hour or a little bit, or even more, depending on how thoroughly you do it. You can also do it as part of a team for making the best decisions. So let's say you're choosing a retirement plan. This would be a perfect technique to use when you're choosing a retirement plan among many, or maybe a new healthcare plan, something like that. Or maybe deciding whether to open up the university for the new academic semester or not, which is, for the spring semester. Given that there's this rising cases of COVID, this will be a hard issue that a number of universities will be seriously talking about. And of course, the HR will be seriously involved in these conversations. The first, identify the need for decision-making process. It's especially hard for do so when there's no explicit problem. So when something is ongoing, let's say retirement plan is ongoing, and it's hard to decide to change it. It's really difficult because you're going to be facing opposition. It makes it uncomfortable to accept the need to make this tough decision around changing the retirement plan or changing the healthcare plan. It feels very uncomfortable. You're going to get a lot of pushback. So it's especially then it's important to identify the need for decision before it becomes an emergency. Then gather information from diverse perspectives. You don't simply want to be talking to other HR folks. You want to make sure to talk to everyone, especially people with whom you disagree, obviously faculty members, whatever it refers to. If it's about faculty search committee, you want to make sure to get people who are white males and older white males and what their perspectives are on diversity inclusion, and see what their perspectives are, because they're often going to be the ones chairing those search committees. So you want to make sure to understand where they're coming from in order to influence them effectively and overcome their resistance to change. Such perspectives would really help you overcome and address your own bias blind spots. It's very easy to fall into that. Then set specific and clear goals. What do you want to accomplish? Paint that clear vision of what you want the retirement plan to accomplish. Not simply funding for the university that's going to be better than the previous retirement plan, but why would it be better for faculty members to have this new, and other staff to have this new retirement plan. It's especially important to recognize when it's a seemingly one-time decision, like the reluctance of a chair of a search committee to take DI requirements seriously is a symptom of a broader problem with the process, where you might want to change the process itself and make that as part of the decision-making evaluation, how you change the process. Then develop clear decision-making criteria. So develop criteria that you'll use to weigh your options and weigh each of them on a score of 1 to 10. So for example, for a retirement plan, you might want to have a score of 1 low to 10 high on how it would protect university funding budgets. You might want to have a score on how you evaluate the faculty, how receptive they would be to it. So for example, I was working on a consulting as part of an effort to get faculty to accept the retirement plan. And what we did was that something that helped the university budget and helped faculty was reduce the variety of investment options that they could have for investing their funding from about, what was it, something like 97 investment options in the previous retirement plan to only 10 investment options in which they can invest their money as part of the retirement plan. And really, faculty members found that much easier, much less complex to deal with. So they liked that. That was beneficial for them. So think about these criteria, weigh them on a scale of 1 to 10. Then generate viable options. So you want to at least have 5 viable options. This is a huge problem that people just look for. If you want looking for a retirement plan, you kind of go for the first one that seems attractive or something like that. Same thing in a search committee, go for the best one, or you're searching for a new administrator or something like that. You want to have at least 5 viable options. That's critical to have that in order to make a good decision and in order to show others that it's a good decision. Remember, you want to be transparent and clear. This process of making the best decisions, this technique that's called making the best decisions, provides a lot of clarity and transparency, which is incredibly important if you want to overcome resistance to change. Then you will want to evaluate the options, pick the best of the bunch, weigh each of the criterion on how much it protects the funding of the university, resistance, how much it would address issues like resistance of faculty, all of these sorts of things. And think about, then multiply them by the weight that you assigned to each one. And the manual on this, you'll be getting a manual on this, will go into much more depth with graphs and statistics on how you do the multiplication. And then you'll get a numerical score. You want to be aware of going with your initial preferences, what you initially wanted, and especially look harshly at your preferred choices. Then you want to implement the option you chose. And there are 2 aspects of the implementation that you want to think about. Imagine the decision completely failed and imagine it absolutely succeeded. Imagining the decision completely failed. So think about, first of all, imagine that it absolutely failed. So don't even argue, don't say, well, it can't fail. No, it absolutely failed. That's the key of this technique. You give yourself permission to brainstorm here and think about all the problems that might have led to this failure. Maybe there wasn't enough buy-in by faculty. They didn't see the process as transparent and clear. There wasn't enough communication. They didn't feel consulted. And consider how you might solve these problems. Obviously, easy enough to solve the consulting problems and so on. Then integrate the solutions of your implementation into the plan. The opposite. Imagine a decision completely succeeded, and then think about the reasons for success. Consider how you can bring these reasons into life and then integrate these into your plans. And finally, the final step, evaluate the implementation and revise as needed. Think about what metrics would show you that the plan is succeeding, that this retirement plan is successful, the acceptance by faculty, that they're not up in arms or something like that. For if you're trying to change the process of diversity inclusion in search committees, how would you see that that's successful? Check in regularly to make sure that you're meeting or exceeding your success metrics, and consider revising the implementation as needed, even the decision, if you figure out that the original decision is wrong, is not as good as you thought it was. All right, I want you to go back to the poll and vote on how much value you see your team using this technique. So please go ahead and vote on this technique. Moderate value, high value, low value. All right. Good. So we see most people voted. I'll give you 10 more seconds to make up your mind. Make sure that you voted. 10 more seconds. Please go ahead. All right. Great. So we see that, again, everyone would find this useful to some extent. That's great. So just over half of you would find of moderate value. So then what you want to do for those who find of moderate value is yourself take some time to read through the manual that I will send to you, and then apply it to a past decision that you is a significant decision, or if you have an immediate upcoming one, to that one. But I recommend that you apply it to a past decision and see how it could have been improved through the using that technique, and then start applying it to future decisions and bring it to your team, to your leaders, and encourage them to do so. For those who see it as high value, that's much more of an immediate priority to bring it to your leaders, go for the manual, bring it to your leaders, forward it to your leadership team, encourage them to read through the manual and start using these techniques. All right. Great. So that's what I want to share with you about overcoming resistance to change. Then additional resources, don't worry about the tiny role. You'll get an email with this. There'll be a free coaching session with me. There'll be a decision aid on these 5 key questions, a manual on the technique for making the best decisions, and the assessment on dangerous judgment errors in the workplace. All right. So that's all that I wanted to share. And at this point, I'll be happy to take questions. You can ask questions by either unmuting yourself or typing them into the chat. Either way is fine. I'll be happy to take your questions at this stage. Please go ahead. You're welcome, Julie. I'm very glad that it was helpful. Genevieve, the same. So that's in the chat. So again, chat your questions or mute yourself and ask your questions. Carolina, great. I'm glad that it was helpful. And don't forget to wait for the accreditation, which will come in a bit after the questions, after any questions. I'll wait 10 more seconds for any questions, and then we'll get to the accreditation info. You're welcome, Mushgan. If that's how I pronounce your name, that's an interesting name. Patricia, you're welcome. Beth, you're very welcome. Karen, I'm glad that it will be helpful to you for using it. All right, looks like no questions. So then let's go on to talk about the accreditation. Oh, Debbie, you're very welcome. And you'll get information, the resources that will help you put it into practice. Okay, I'll turn it over to Andrea right now to go over the accreditation.
All right, Dr. Gleb, I just want to say thank you. I know this will be very helpful. I do interviews from time to time, and I know a lot of times I use, or I'm very biased because I trust my instinct. And I know that, you know, you shouldn't trust your instinct. So it's going to be a work in progress for me to make those changes. But I think this was just really helpful information. So let's give Dr. Gleb a virtual round of applause for this informative presentation. We want to thank you for your insight to really kind of help us overcome resistance to change. As I mentioned, I tend to rely on my instinct. And again, thank you for taking the time to share with us your expertise. So I'm going to share my screen and hold on one second. Let's see. I'm going to share my screen, and I want to put up some information for you all before we get ready to go. I know it's 3 o'clock. Can you all see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, sorry about that.
No worries. Okay, now we can see it.
Can you see my screen? Okay, so I would just wanted to share the information that I mentioned. Today's session has been HRCI pre-approved, and the activity program ID is 538065. I also want to thank a few people that are on the call today. I want to just acknowledge our past president, Jennifer Scott. She's our past president for the DC Metro. I wanted to just acknowledge her. And also want to acknowledge Julie Boggs and Beth Humphreys from our national office. I also want to acknowledge Sally Reed, who's the past president for the Maryland chapter. And I just want to also just thank all of our members for joining us today. Also, just if you all will check out the CUPA website. It's our 15th year anniversary, and just make sure that you check out the website because there are new toolkits that they have shared with us and they've updated. So just make sure that you go ahead and check those out. There's lots of webinars and lots of workshops that we can join. The wonderful thing about being virtual now, we can sort of join, even though we can't go into actual events, but we can actually join other webinars. November 18th, we have The Journey, Developing an Office of Equity and Inclusion and Creating the Equity and Inclusion Roadmap for Success with Sharon Bland. She is the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer for Montgomery College here in Maryland. And then on December 8th, we're going to have our first holiday Wine and Wine. From 5 to 6. In January 27th from 2 to 3, we will have Leading Through Uncertainty with our own President-elect Joseph Pettifor, who is the Associate Vice President of Human Resources at Howard Community College. And then I want to encourage people to join the Maryland chapter. They do these coffee breaks where they do these wonderful discussions. And then we'll have our elections nominations in 2021. So again, I just want to thank everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. And if you don't make it next week, have a happy Thanksgiving.